Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Society. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe you've had a long day, or perhaps you're someone who prefers drifting off to tales of human ingenuity and ancient innovation rather than counting sheep. Either way, this evening's journey is crafted just for you. You have nothing to do but rest. Let your mind wander gently, your breathing slow, and your body settle as if time itself has softened around you. Because tonight, we're not simply reading about history. We're sailing back more than 1,000 years to an age when Scandinavian seafarers changed the world not through magic, but through remarkable science and technology. The Viking Age, spanning roughly from the late 8th century to the mid-11th century, represents one of the most fascinating periods of technological advancement in medieval Europe. These Norse people, coming primarily from what we now know as Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, developed innovations that would ripple through centuries and across continents. They were shipbuilders who created vessels so advanced that similar designs wouldn't appear elsewhere for generations. They were metallurgists who crafted steel centuries before the Industrial Revolution would make such materials commonplace. They were navigators who crossed open oceans without compasses, finding their way by reading the sky, the sea, and tools of crystalline precision. But before we embark on this journey through Viking innovation, if these calm, curious explorations of human achievement help you unwind or give you a peaceful way to end your day, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It helps others discover these quiet stories, one sleepy soul at a time. Now, let's begin our voyage into the remarkable world of Viking science and technology. The revolutionary longship. Picture, if you will, a vessel unlike any that had sailed European waters before. Long and narrow, elegant as a knife blade cutting through butter, powered by both wind and human strength. The Viking longship represents perhaps the single most important technological innovation of the entire Viking Age, and understanding how these ships were built reveals a depth of engineering knowledge that still impresses modern naval architects. The secret began with the wood itself. Viking shipbuilders, whom we might call master craftsmen or simply boat builders, selected their timber with extraordinary care. Oak was preferred for the main structure, chosen for its strength and natural resistance to water damage. But this wasn't just any oak. The best shipbuilders would identify trees while they were still growing, selecting those with natural curves that could be shaped into the ship's ribs and stems with minimal cutting. They understood something profound about wood, that it's strongest along its grain, and by following the natural curves of a tree's growth, they could create components that were both lighter and more resilient than anything cut against the grain. The construction method they developed was called clinker building, though the Vikings themselves would not have used that term. In this technique, overlapping planks, called strakes, were joined together with iron rivets. Each plank overlapped the one below it, creating a shell that was built from the outside in, rather than the skeleton-first approach used by other European shipbuilders of the time. This might seem like a small distinction, but it changed everything. Think about it this way. When you build a ship by first constructing a rigid skeleton of ribs and then attaching planks to that framework, you create a vessel that is strong but inflexible. It's like building a house, sturdy and permanent. But the Viking shipbuilders understood something that wouldn't be fully appreciated by other cultures for centuries. They knew that a ship on the ocean needs to move with the waves, not against them. By overlapping their planks and fastening them with iron rivets, they created a hull that had a certain suppleness, a flexibility that allowed it to absorb the shock of waves rather than fighting them. The planks weren't nailed down tightly. Instead, they were caulked with wool and tar, materials that could compress and expand, and the iron rivets allowed for tiny amounts of movement. When a wave struck the hull, the entire structure could flex slightly, bending rather than breaking. Modern engineers call this elastic deformation, but the Vikings simply knew it worked. They had observed, experimented, and perfected this technique through generations of trial and error, creating ships that could survive the fierce storms of the North Atlantic while other vessels would splinter and sink. The keel, that central backbone running the length of the ship, was another marvel of thoughtful design. Viking longships had remarkably shallow keels compared to other seafaring vessels of their time. Most European ships required deep harbors and established ports because their heavy, deep keels needed substantial water depth. But a Viking longship, with its shallow draft, often just 3 feet or so, could sail not only across open ocean, but also up rivers, through shallow coastal waters, and right onto beaches. This versatility was revolutionary. Imagine being able to sail your vessel across the North Sea, navigate up a river deep into enemy territory, conduct your business whether trade or raid, and then simply row back out and sail home. No need for docks or harbors. No vulnerability while anchored in deep water. The shallow draft meant Vikings could appear seemingly anywhere there was water, giving them a strategic advantage that made them the dominant maritime force of their age. But the ship's flexibility had to be balanced with strength, and this is where Viking craftsmanship truly shone. The overlapping planks were fastened to internal ribs with carefully shaped cleats, not nails. These cleats were lashed to the ribs with spruce roots or animal sinew, creating joints that could flex without breaking. The entire vessel moved as one organic unit, each component working with the others in a symphony of wood, iron, and rope. The mast was another piece of elegant engineering. It sat in a large wooden block called a mast fish, which distributed the mast's enormous forces across several of the ship's ribs. The sail, when raised, would put tremendous pressure on this single point, and the mast fish ensured that pressure spread out, preventing any single component from failing. The Vikings also developed something called a bytass, a wooden pole that could be adjusted to change the angle of the sail. This simple innovation allowed them to sail closer to the wind than other vessels of their time, giving them greater speed and maneuverability. Different types of ships served different purposes, showcasing Viking shipbuilders' understanding of specialized design. The longship, or drakars, as they're sometimes romantically called with their dragon-headed prows, were built for speed and warfare. These could be up to 100 feet long but remained narrow, typically only about 15 to 20 feet wide. They could carry 100 warriors or more, with most men rowing when wind failed or when navigating rivers and coastal waters. The Nar, by contrast, was the workhorse of Viking trade. Shorter and broader than longships, with higher sides and more cargo space, these vessels were built to carry goods, people and livestock across vast distances. The knarrs that sailed to Iceland, Greenland, and eventually to North America would have been loaded with everything needed to establish new settlements, from farming tools to animals, from timber to families seeking new lives. These ships were slower than longships, but far more stable, with their deeper drafts making them safer in rough seas and better suited for carrying heavy loads. Carves represented a middle ground, smaller vessels used for coastal fishing and local trade. Each design reflected a clear understanding of hydrodynamics, structural engineering, and the specific requirements of different maritime activities. The speed of Viking longships astonished their contemporaries and still impresses today. Historical records and modern reconstructions suggest these vessels could sustain speeds of 5 to 10 knots under normal conditions, but it could reach peaks of 15 knots or more when all oars were manned and wind conditions were favorable. To put this in perspective, 15 knots is over 17 miles per hour, remarkably fast for a wooden vessel powered by wind and human muscle. Moving at such speed that the spray would fly, the dragon prow would seem to skim the wave tops, and the crew would arrive at distant shores while defenders were still trying to comprehend that they'd been spotted on the horizon. Navigation without compasses. But having a swift ship means nothing if you cannot find your way across the featureless expanse of the ocean. The Vikings, operating centuries before the magnetic compass became widely available in Europe, developed navigation techniques that allowed them to cross the North Atlantic, reaching Iceland, Greenland, and even the coast of North America. How did they accomplish this remarkable feat? The answer lies in a combination of careful observation, ingenious tools, and accumulated knowledge passed from navigator to navigator across generations. The sun was, naturally, the primary reference point for Viking navigators. During the summer sailing season, when most long voyages took place, the sun's arc across the sky provided a reliable indicator of direction. But the sun's position changes throughout the day and throughout the year, making simple observation insufficient for precision navigation. This is where one of the most fascinating Viking innovations comes into play: the sun compass. Archaeological evidence for the sun compass comes from a fragmentary wooden disc discovered in Greenland at a site dating to the Viking Age. The disc, just under 3 inches in diameter, has a hole in its center and crude markings around its edge. While some historians question whether this specific artifact was truly a navigational tool, the principle is sound and modern reconstructions have proven effective. A sun compass would have worked like this: a wooden disc, marked with cardinal directions and hour markings, would have a central pin or gnomon standing vertically in its center. As the sun moved across the sky, this pin would cast a shadow on the disc. If the navigator knew the date and could observe the shadow's position at a specific time of day, they could determine true north and south. The markings around the edge would help compensate for the sun's changing position throughout the sailing season. The elegance of this system lies in its simplicity. No complex machinery, no difficult calculations, just a piece of wood, a pin, and knowledge of the sun's seasonal movements. Viking navigators would have maintained detailed mental maps of shadow positions for different dates and latitudes, knowledge acquired through years of experience and teaching. When the sun was visible, they could check and adjust their course with confidence. But the North Atlantic is not known for its clear skies. Fog, clouds, and storms could obscure the sun for days at a time, and here, the Vikings employed perhaps their most mysterious and debated navigational tool, the sunstone. Medieval Icelandic texts mention the solar stein in contexts that suggest they were used for navigation, but the sagas provide little detail about how they actually worked. Modern researchers have developed a compelling theory based on the optical properties of certain crystals found in Iceland. The most likely candidate for the legendary sunstone is Iceland spar, a form of calcite crystal that's transparent and exhibits a property called birefringence, or double refraction. When light passes through Iceland spar, it splits into two rays of polarized light. Even on a cloudy day, even when the sun itself is not visible, skylight remains partially polarized based on the sun's position. By rotating a piece of Iceland spar and observing the two images it produces, a skilled navigator could determine when both images were equally bright, a point that indicated the direction of the sun even through thick clouds. Experiments with Iceland spar have demonstrated that this technique can locate the sun's position to within a few degrees of accuracy, even on heavily overcast days. Whether Viking navigators fully understood the physics of polarized light is unknown and perhaps unlikely, but they didn't need to understand why it worked. They only needed to observe that it did work, that by manipulating this magical crystal in a certain way, they could find the sun's direction when their eyes could not. Star navigation complemented solar techniques, particularly during the brief summer nights at northern latitudes. The North Star, Polaris, provided a fixed reference point for determining latitude. By measuring the angle of Polaris above the horizon, navigators could determine how far north they had traveled. While the Vikings had no sextant or astrolabe, there's evidence they may have used simple tools to measure angles, perhaps notched sticks, or even their own hands held at arm's length. But precision instruments were not the only tools in a Viking navigator's arsenal. Generations of sailing experience created a rich body of practical knowledge. Experienced navigators knew the types of clouds that formed over distant land. They recognized the birds whose presence indicated proximity to shore, and knew how far from land different species typically ranged. They read the color and movement of the water, understanding how waves behaved near underwater obstacles, or how currents ran along coastlines. The sailing directions recorded in medieval Icelandic texts reveal this accumulated wisdom. One set of directions for sailing from Norway to Greenland advises maintaining a latitude that would keep the navigator south of the Shetland Islands, such that those islands would just be visible on the northern horizon, while passing north of the Faroe Islands, such that the sea appeared halfway up the mountains. These aren't abstract coordinates. They're practical, observable landmarks that an experienced sailor could use to maintain course across hundreds of miles of open ocean. Whales and seabirds served as living signposts. Certain whale species followed regular migration routes that Viking navigators learned to recognize. Flocks of seabirds flying in a consistent direction at dawn or dusk were heading to or from land, providing bearings to coasts beyond the horizon. The Vikings paid attention to every detail of the natural world, building their navigation system not on a single technology, but on a web of observations, each reinforcing the others. The beitas deserves special mention again in the context of navigation. This adjustable pole allowed Vikings to optimize their sail angle not just for speed, but for maintaining course. By adjusting the beitas, a skillful crew could sail remarkably close to the wind, tacking at angles that would have been impossible for the square-rigged ships of other European cultures. This meant they could maintain course even when wind conditions were unfavorable, giving them greater control over their route and reducing the risk of being blown off course. Dead reckoning, estimating position based on speed, time, and direction traveled, formed the backbone of Viking navigation. An experienced navigator developed an intuitive sense of the ship's speed through the water. They could estimate distance covered by noting the passage of time, whether measured by the sun's movement, by sand glasses, or simply by experienced estimation. By combining estimated speed and direction with known starting positions and elapsed time, they could maintain a reasonably accurate sense of their location, even when other reference points were unavailable. The remarkable success of Viking navigation is proven by their achievements. They established settlements in Iceland around the year 870, more than 800 miles across open ocean from Norway. They reached Greenland, another 500 miles beyond Iceland, by the late 10th century. And, around the year 1000, they made landfall in North America, at a place they called Vinland, which we now know was located on the northern tip of Newfoundland. These weren't lucky accidents. They were the result of systematic navigation techniques, carefully refined ships, and an accumulated body of knowledge that allowed Norse sailors to venture confidently into waters that terrified other European seafarers. The art of the forge. The ring of hammer on anvil echoed through Viking settlements, a sound as fundamental to Norse life as the crash of waves or the cry of seabirds. Blacksmiths held a position of enormous importance in Viking society, and for good reason. Their mastery of metallurgy provided the tools, weapons, and countless implements that made Viking life possible. But the journey from raw ore to finished blade was a complex process requiring skill, knowledge, and no small amount of physical strength. Iron was the foundation of Viking metalworking, but accessing it required ingenuity. While some iron ore was mined from underground deposits in various locations across Scandinavia, the most common source during the Viking Age was bog iron. This type of ore forms in wetlands and marshes, where iron-rich groundwater meets oxygen in the air or plant roots, precipitating iron oxides that accumulate over time. Bog iron appears as irregular chunks or nodules, often rust red or brown, lying in or beneath the boggy soil. Collecting bog iron was labor-intensive work, typically done in autumn and winter when water levels were lower and the ground more accessible. Workers would wade through cold marshes, feeling with their feet or using long probes to locate iron-rich deposits. The ore they extracted was relatively low grade, containing substantial amounts of impurities, but it was renewable in a sense. Given enough time, perhaps 20 to 50 years, iron would accumulate again in the same bogs, providing a sustainable, if modest, source of this crucial material. Once collected, the bog iron ore had to be smelted to extract usable metal. The Vikings used bloomery furnaces for this purpose. small clay or stone structures typically about 3 feet tall, lined with clay to withstand extreme heat. The process began by creating a charcoal fire in the furnace base. Charcoal, not ordinary wood, was essential because it burned hot enough to melt iron and contained carbon, which would prove important for the final product's properties. Once the charcoal fire was blazing, alternating layers of iron ore and more charcoal were added to the furnace. Air was forced into the furnace through clay tubes called tuyères, either by hand bellows or by natural draft if the furnace was positioned in to catch prevailing winds. The temperature inside would climb to around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to begin reducing the iron ore, but not quite hot enough to fully melt iron itself. This temperature range was actually ideal for bloomery production. As the ore heated, oxygen atoms bonded to the iron would break free, reacting with carbon from the charcoal to form carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide gases that escaped the furnace. What remained was a spongy mass of iron mixed with slag, the mineral impurities from the ore that melted and ran out through a tap hole at the furnace base. This spongy mass was called a bloom, and it had to be worked while still hot. The bloom would be removed from the furnace and immediately placed on an anvil, where blacksmiths would hammer it repeatedly. This hammering served multiple purposes. It consolidated the spongy iron into a denser mass, drove out remaining slag and impurities, and began to shape the bloom into a workable billet or bar. The work was exhausting, the iron cooling rapidly and requiring constant reheating to maintain workability. A single smelting operation might produce a bloom weighing anywhere from 5 to 30 pounds, enough for one or several tools or weapons depending on size. The iron produced through this bloomery process was wrought iron, relatively pure iron with a low carbon content. Wrought iron is tough and ductile, meaning it can be bent and shaped without breaking, but it's relatively soft and doesn't hold a sharp edge well. For tools, and especially for weapons, something harder was needed. This is where steel enters the picture. Steel is an alloy of iron and carbon, typically containing between about 0.5% and 2% carbon by weight. This carbon makes an enormous difference to the metal's properties. The carbon atoms fit into the spaces between iron atoms in the crystal structure, making the metal significantly harder and allowing it to hold a sharp edge. But creating steel intentionally required understanding that may have been partially empirical rather than theoretical. Viking blacksmiths used several techniques to introduce carbon into iron. The simplest was case hardening, where finished iron objects were packed in charcoal and heated for extended periods. Carbon from the charcoal would diffuse into the surface of the iron, creating a hard exterior layer while maintaining a tougher, more flexible iron core. This technique was ideal for tools like axes or chisels that needed hard, sharp edges but also needed to withstand impact without shattering. Another method, and one that reveals the Vikings' sophisticated understanding of materials, was pattern welding. This technique involved forge welding together rods or bars of iron and steel, heating them to near melting temperature and hammering them together so they fused into a single piece. The blacksmith would then fold and twist these composite bars, forge welding them repeatedly to create layers of alternating iron and steel. The result was a blade with a distinctive wavy or feathered pattern on its surface, visible especially after the metal was etched with acid or other chemicals. More importantly, pattern welding created a blade that combined the best properties of both materials. The flexible iron core prevented the blade from breaking under stress, while the steel edges provided hardness and edge retention. A pattern-welded blade was superior to one made from either material alone, demonstrating an intuitive grasp of composite material engineering. The most remarkable examples of Viking metallurgy were the Ulfbert swords. These weapons, marked with the inscription PVLFBRHT+, in the fuller or central groove of the blade, represent a pinnacle of a medieval craftsmanship. Analysis of genuine Ulfbert blades has revealed steel of extraordinary purity, with very low levels of slag inclusions, and a carbon content that was precisely controlled to optimize hardness and flexibility. Creating such high-quality steel required techniques that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the Industrial Revolution, over 7 centuries later. The Ulfbert smiths, whoever they were, knew how to remove virtually all impurities from their iron bloom, how to carefully control carbon content, and how to forge weld different grades of steel to create blades of supreme quality. Some historians suggest these swords may have been made from imported crucible steel from Central Asia, while others believe they were produced in the Rhineland region and traded to Scandinavia. Either way, the Vikings who wielded them possessed weapons that were genuinely superior to almost anything else available in medieval Europe. But not all Vikings could afford an Ulfbert sword. These weapons were enormously expensive, with some historical records suggesting a good sword might be worth the equivalent of 16 dairy cows. For most warriors, more common weapons were the practical choice, and here too, Viking metalworking skill was evident. A recent and fascinating discovery has shed light on Viking forging practices. Some sources describe how Viking smiths would add bones, from both animals and sometimes from their ancestors, to the forging process. This practice was likely rooted in spiritual beliefs. The idea that adding bones would transfer the strength or spirit of the deceased into the weapon. But there was an unintended scientific benefit. When bones are burned in a low-oxygen environment, they create bone charcoal, similar to wood charcoal but with subtle differences. This bone charcoal is rich in carbon and, when heated in contact with iron, can transfer carbon into the metal, creating steel. Modern experiments have shown that carbon from bone charcoal can penetrate up to 3 millimeters into iron, effectively case-hardening the weapon. The Vikings didn't understand the chemistry of carbon diffusion, but they had discovered through trial and observation that this ritual practice created better, harder, more durable weapons. It's a perfect example of empirical technology, knowledge gained through practice that works even without full theoretical understanding. The blacksmith's tools themselves reveal careful design. Hammers of various weights and face shapes allowed for different types of work, from heavy forging to delicate detail. Tongs were carefully shaped to grip hot metal securely without leaving marks. Anvils, typically made from harder iron or steel faces welded onto softer iron bodies, provided stable work surfaces that could withstand thousands of hammer blows. Chisels, punches, and files allowed for cutting and shaping. These tools weren't just functional. Many were works of art in themselves, with decorated handles and carefully balanced forms that made long hours of work more efficient and less exhausting. The role of the blacksmith in Viking society extended beyond mere manufacturing. These craftspeople were viewed with a mixture of respect and sometimes superstitious awe. The forge was a place of transformation, where worthless stone became valuable metal, where raw materials took on forms that could protect, provide, or destroy. The blacksmith's control over fire and metal gave them a quasi-magical status in a culture where mythology and daily life intertwined. Some sagas describe blacksmiths as having connections to the divine, their craft a gift from the gods themselves. Weapons of legend. The products of the Viking forge were not merely tools, they were extensions of warrior identity, symbols of status, and objects of profound cultural significance. Understanding Viking weapons means appreciating not just their physical properties, but also their place in Norse society and the remarkable craftsmanship that went into creating them. The sword held the highest position in the hierarchy of Viking weapons. These were costly, complex to produce, and therefore owned primarily by wealthy jarls, nobles, and successful warriors who could afford them. A fine sword was an heirloom, passed from father to son, sometimes for generations. Many swords had names. The sagas mention blades called leg biter, gold hilt, and other evocative titles, suggesting these weapons had personalities and histories of their own. Viking swords were typically double-edged, around 30 to 35 inches in blade length, designed for both cutting and thrusting. The blades featured a central fuller, a groove running most of their length. This fuller is sometimes mistakenly called a blood groove, but its actual purpose was to reduce weight while maintaining structural strength. By removing material from the blade's center, where it contributed less to rigidity, smiths could create swords that were lighter and easier to wield without sacrificing sturdiness. The pattern welding technique we discussed reached its artistic and functional peak in sword production. A master smith might create the blade's core from twisted bars of alternating iron and steel, producing complex herringbone or water-like patterns. The cutting edges would be forge welded on separately, made from higher carbon steel that could be hardened to hold a razor-sharp edge. The contrast between the decorative patterned core and the plain hardened edges was functional art, beautiful to look at but designed primarily for performance. After forging, the blade would be ground and polished, work that could take days of careful effort. The blade would then be heat-treated, a critical process that determined its final hardness. The steel would be heated to a bright orange glow and then quenched, plunged rapidly into water, oil, or sometimes other liquids that each produced slightly different cooling rates and final properties. This quenching made the steel very hard but also brittle, so it had to be tempered by carefully reheating to a lower temperature, perhaps 400 or 500 degrees, then cooling slowly. This tempering reduced brittleness while retaining most of the hardness, creating a blade that could take and hold a sharp edge while resisting breaking under the stress of combat. The hilt assembly was equally important. The grip, typically made from wood, bone, or antler, was shaped to fit comfortably in the hand, often wrapped with cord or leather for better grip. The crossguard protected the wielder's hand while providing balance, and the pommel, the weight at the end of the grip, was carefully sized to counterbalance the blade's weight, making the sword feel nimble and quick despite its size. Pommels were often decorated with silver, copper, or brass inlays, showcasing the owner's wealth and the craftsperson's skill. But swords, for all their prestige, were not the most common Viking weapon. That distinction belongs to the axe. Axes were far more affordable than swords, easier to produce, and equally deadly in skilled hands. More importantly, axes were dual-purpose tools. A farmer might use the same axe to split firewood and defend his home, making them practical choices for all levels of Viking society. Viking axes varied widely in size and design. Small hand axes could be thrown or used one-handed. Larger battle axes, wielded with both hands, could deliver devastating blows capable of splitting shields, denting helmets, and severely injuring armored opponents. The famous Mamen axe, discovered in a 10th century burial and decorated with elaborate silver inlay, demonstrates that axes too could be status symbols and works of art. The construction of an axe head reveals efficient use of limited steel resources. The body of the axe was typically wrought iron, folded and forge welded to create an eye, the socket where the wooden handle would fit. A thin piece of high carbon steel would then be forge welded to this iron body, forming the cutting edge. This composite construction meant expensive steel was used only where absolutely necessary, while the iron body provided weight and durability at lower cost. The handles, called hafts, were carefully shaped from ash or other flexible hardwoods. The wood's natural flexibility absorbed shock when the axe struck something, reducing the stress transmitted to the wielder's arms and the axe head itself. A well-balanced axe with a properly shaped haft was a remarkably effective weapon in the hands of someone trained in its use. Spears represented another crucial weapon type, possibly even more common than axes. Every free man in Viking society was expected to own weapons, and spears were the most accessible choice. They required less metal than swords or axes, were relatively simple to produce, and their reach made them effective in both warfare and hunting. Viking spear design showed considerable variety. Some had small, narrow blades designed for thrusting. Others featured broader, leaf-shaped blades that could cut as well as thrust. The socket, where the iron head attached to the wooden shaft, was carefully forged to grip the shaft securely, sometimes with rivets or nails piercing through the socket into the wood. The shafts were typically made from ash, 6 to 9 feet long, allowing a warrior to strike from relatively safe distance. Some spears could be thrown, though this was riskier since it meant losing your weapon. More commonly, spears were used in formation fighting, where rows of warriors with overlapping shields would present a bristling wall of spear points to advancing enemies. The production of spearheads demonstrates metalworking efficiency. The socket was formed by taking a flat piece of iron, heating it, and wrapping it around a tapered mandrel, a cone-shaped form, then forge welding the edges together. The blade portion would be drawn out and shaped, sometimes with a steel edge forge welded on, and the whole piece carefully heat-treated. A skilled smith could produce several spearheads in a day, making them economically viable for widespread distribution. Armor was less common among Vikings than weapons, primarily due to cost and the significant amount of metal required. Mail armor, called brynja in Old Norse, consisted of thousands of interlocking iron rings, each ring individually made and linked to form a flexible protective garment. Creating a mail shirt could require months of work. Riveting each ring closed or, in cheaper versions, simply butting the ring ends together. Mail was remarkably effective against cutting weapons, but less so against heavy blunt impacts or thrusting points that could spread the rings apart. More accessible was the shield, and here we see another example of Viking engineering pragmatism. Shields were typically round, about 3 feet in diameter, made from thin wooden planks, often lime or fir wood, glued and sometimes riveted together. The shield would be painted, often brightly colored, and reinforced with leather around the rim to prevent splitting. At the center, a hole allowed the hand grip to pass through, and this opening was protected by an iron boss, a dome-shaped piece that deflected blows away from the hand. The shield's construction was a masterclass in efficient design. The thin wood was light enough to carry for hours without exhausting the bearer, but strong enough to stop sword cuts or axe blows, at least for several impacts. The flexibility of the wood helped absorb force, and when a shield did break, it was easily and quickly repaired or replaced. In formation fighting, overlapping shields created a near-impenetrable wall, a tactic called the shield wall that was central to Viking military tactics. Helmets, contrary to popular mythology, never featured horns. Archaeological evidence shows Viking helmets were practical rather than fantastical. Typically simple iron caps, sometimes with nose guards or face masks. The famous horned helmet image comes from 19th century Romanticism, not historical reality. Real Viking warriors wanted protection that worked, not costume pieces that would catch weapons and throw off balance. The symbolic value of weapons in Viking culture cannot be overstated. Fine weapons were status symbols comparable to luxury cars in modern society. They were gifts between nobles, rewards for loyalty, and treasured possessions. Some weapons were given elaborate names and their own reputations. Warriors would be buried with their weapons, believing they would need them in the afterlife. This meant that many of our best preserved examples come from graves, weapons interred with their owners as a final mark of respect and identity. Textile technology beyond metal and wood, another technological domain, reveals Viking ingenuity, textile production. This might seem less dramatic than forging swords or building ships, but textile technology was absolutely fundamental to Viking life. Clothing protected against Scandinavia's harsh weather. Sails powered the ships that made Viking expansion possible. Ropes secured cargo, controlled sails, and bound together countless aspects of daily life. All of these began with fiber, skill, and tools that represented generations of accumulated knowledge. Wool was the primary textile fiber in Viking society. Sheep had been domesticated in Scandinavia for thousands of years, and by the Viking Age, careful breeding had produced animals well adapted to northern climates. Viking Age sheep produced wool with different qualities for different purposes. Some varieties gave fine, soft wool suitable for clothing worn against the skin. Others produced coarser fibers, ideal for outer garments, blankets, or sails. Preparing wool for spinning began with shearing, typically done in spring or early summer when the sheep were losing their winter coats naturally. Instead of metal shears, many Vikings used a technique called ruwing, where loose wool was simply pulled away from the sheep's body. This produced longer fibers than cutting, and was gentler on the animal, though it only worked during the natural shedding season. The raw wool was then cleaned, an important step because sheep's wool contains lanolin, natural oils, and whatever dirt and plant matter had accumulated. Cleaning involved repeated washing in warm water, sometimes with simple soap made from animal fat and wood ash. The wool would be rinsed, squeezed out, and spread to dry. Next came carding or combing, processes that aligned the wool fibers in preparation for spinning. Hand cards, boards covered in animal bristles or small metal teeth, would be used to brush the wool, untangling it and arranging fibers roughly parallel to each other. Combing served a similar purpose but produced a smoother result, better for fine threads. Spinning transformed loose wool into thread. The fundamental tool was a spindle, a weighted stick that allowed fibers to be drawn out and twisted together. A Viking spindle consisted of a wooden shaft about a foot long with a whorl, a circular weight made from clay, stone, or wood, positioned near one end. To spin, the user would attach a starter thread to the spindle, hold a mass of prepared wool in one hand, and twist the spindle with the other, allowing it to spin freely. As the spindle rotated, it twisted fibers from the wool mass into thread. The spinner controlled how much fiber was released and how tightly it was twisted, determining the thread's thickness and strength. When the spindle had spun enough thread that it reached the floor, the newly made thread would be wound onto the spindle shaft and the process would repeat. Spinning was time-consuming work. Creating enough thread for a single garment could take weeks, making textiles genuinely valuable commodities. The spun wool was then ready for weaving, the process of interlacing perpendicular threads to create fabric. Viking looms were typically warp-weighted, vertical looms, large rectangular frames that leaned against a wall or stood free. Warp threads, the vertical elements, hung from the top beam with weights, typically clay or stone hanging from the bottom to keep them taut. The weaver would pass the weft thread, the horizontal element, back and forth through the warp threads. A heddle rod allowed the weaver to lift alternating warp threads, creating a space called a shed through which the weft could pass. After each pass, a sword beater, a flat wooden blade, would be used to pack the weft threads tightly together, creating dense, sturdy fabric. Weaving was skilled work requiring rhythm, attention to detail, and physical stamina, as the weaver stood for hours working the heavy loom. Different weaving patterns created different fabric properties. Simple tabby weave, alternating over one under one, produced balanced, versatile cloth. Twill weaves, where the weft passed over multiple warp threads in a diagonal pattern, created fabric that was warmer, more flexible, and shed water better, ideal for outer garments. Diamond twills and other patterns added decorative elements while maintaining functionality. The fabric could be fulled after weaving, a process where it was soaked in water with fulling agents, often stale urine which provided ammonia that helped cleanse and tighten the fibers, then pounded or trampled to mat the fibers together more densely. Fulled wool was warmer, more water-resistant, and more durable than unfulled fabric, making it ideal for outdoor clothing. Dyeing added color and sometimes social meaning to textiles. Vikings used a wide range of natural dyes. Madder root produced reds. Woad and weld created blues and yellows. Various barks, leaves, and lichens provided browns, greens, and other hues. Some colors were more difficult and expensive to produce, making them markers of wealth and status. Purple dyes, which required enormous amounts of specific sea snails, were particularly precious. The most impressive textile product, though, was the sail. A Viking longship's sail might be 40 to 50 feet square, an enormous piece of fabric that required months of work to produce. Sails were typically made from wool, woven in a strong tabby pattern, and then fulled to create a dense, relatively water-resistant fabric. The amount of work involved was staggering. Estimates suggest a single sail might require wool from 200 sheep, which would need to be sheared, cleaned, carded, spun into thread, and then woven. Multiple weavers working together on large looms could produce the necessary fabric in sections, which would then be carefully sewn together with strong linen thread. Sails were often decorated with stripes or patterns in different colors, created by using dyed wool in specific areas of the weaving. These patterns were not purely decorative. They served as identifying marks, allowing people to recognize whose ship was approaching from the pattern visible on the sail. Maintaining sails required constant attention. The fabric would be coated with animal fat or pine tar to improve water resistance, though this made the sail heavier. Damaged areas had to be patched, weakened sections reinforced, and the entire sail periodically checked for rot or wear. A ship's sail was a significant investment that needed care to maintain its value. Rope making was another crucial textile skill. Ships required enormous amounts of rope for rigging, dozens or hundreds of yards in various thicknesses. Rope was made from a variety of fibers. Bast fibers from lime or willow trees produced strong cordage. Hemp, if available through trade, made excellent rope. Even wool could be used for some purposes. Making rope involved twisting fibers together into yarn, then twisting multiple yarns together in the opposite direction to create a stable cord that wouldn't unravel. Larger ropes consisted of multiple cords twisted together, again with the twist direction alternating at each level. This counter-twisting created rope that was strong, flexible, and stable. The scale of rope production for a single ship was considerable. A large longship might require a half-ton or more of rope in various sizes, from thin lashing lines to thick mooring cables. All of this had to be produced by hand. Another example of the enormous labor investment that Viking technology required. Woodworking mastery. Wood was perhaps the most versatile material available to Viking craftspeople, and their mastery of woodworking was evident in everything from ships to household items. Understanding their techniques and tools reveals a sophisticated relationship with timber. Based on deep knowledge of different wood species, their properties, and how to work them efficiently. The basic Viking woodworking toolkit centered on edge tools, implements that cut by being forced against the wood. The axe was paramount, not just a weapon, but an essential tool for virtually every aspect of wooden construction. A skilled woodworker's axe was carefully shaped and sharpened, capable of remarkably fine work. Large felling axes, with heavy heads and long handles, could bring down substantial trees. Smaller hand axes allowed for detailed shaping. The trick was controlling the axe precisely, using it not as a crude chopping instrument, but as a carving tool. Experienced Viking woodworkers could shape curved surfaces, cut joints, and even do decorative work with axes, techniques that seem almost impossible to those accustomed to saws and planes, but which were natural to someone trained from childhood. The adze complemented the axe, featuring a blade oriented perpendicular to the handle rather than parallel. Adzes were swung in a chopping motion but removed wood in a scooping action, ideal for hollowing out shapes like boat hulls or bowls. Different adze shapes served different purposes, from large shipbuilding adzes to small, delicate tools for fine carving. Augers and drills created holes, essential for joining wooden components. A Viking auger consisted of a twisting blade attached to a cross handle, turned by hand to bore through wood. Different sizes allowed for different hole diameters, and skilled workers could drill remarkably straight and precise holes without the guide bushings that modern tools employ. Saws existed but were less common than might be expected. Metal suitable for saw blades was expensive, and saws required skilled metal workers to create the teeth and set them properly. Where saws were available, they were used for precision cuts that would be difficult with axes. But much of the work that would be done with saws in later periods was accomplished by Vikings using axes and splitting techniques. Splitting wood along its grain was a fundamental technique. By driving wooden or iron wedges into a log, woodworkers could split it into planks that followed the grain naturally, creating stronger pieces than sawing across the grain would produce. This technique was essential in shipbuilding, where those long, curved planks needed to follow the wood's natural strength. The choice of wood species reflected deep practical knowledge. Oak was prized for ship construction, posts, and structural elements because of its strength and durability, particularly when exposed to water. Ash was favored for tool handles, oars, and weapon shafts because it was strong yet flexible. Birch provided material for smaller items and decorative work. Pine and fir were used where lighter weight was important, or where the wood wouldn't face heavy loads. Vikings understood that wood needed to be seasoned, allowed to dry before use. Fresh-cut green wood contained significant moisture and would shrink, warp, or crack as it dried. By storing wood in dry conditions, often for months or years, they allowed this moisture to evaporate slowly, stabilizing the material. Some applications actually called for green wood, its flexibility useful for bending into curved shapes. But most work required dry, seasoned timber. Housing construction demonstrated woodworking skill at a structural scale. Viking longhouses, the communal buildings where families lived, worked, and socialized, were sophisticated wooden structures. The basic design featured a long rectangular hall with rows of posts supporting the roof. These posts, often massive oak timbers, were set into the ground or placed on foundation stones to keep them above damp soil. The walls could be constructed in various ways. wattle, and daub, where woven branches were plastered with mud and clay, provided insulation. Vertical planks, sometimes overlapping like ship planks, created more substantial walls. Turf, cut in large blocks, could be piled up to create thick, insulating walls that required minimal wood. The roof was typically a double-pitched design covered with thatch, turf, or wooden shingles. Supporting such a roof required understanding load distribution and structural principles. The weight had to be carried by the main posts through to the ground, with the walls serving more as screens than load-bearing elements. Inside, woodworking created the furniture and fittings that made the space livable. Benches along the walls provided seating and sleeping surfaces. Platforms or lofts created storage areas. Chests, built from carefully joined planks, stored clothing and valuables. Tables, though less common than benches, allowed for dining and work. All of these items were made without nails or metal fasteners in many cases, using carefully cut joints, wooden pegs, and an understanding of how wood moved and could be shaped to hold together. Decorative wood carving added beauty to functional objects. The famous dragon heads on ship prows were carved from solid wood, often with intricate patterns flowing along their surfaces. Furniture might feature carved panels with interlacing geometric designs or stylized animals. Door frames, bedposts, and even everyday items like spoons or cups could be decorated, showing that even utilitarian objects deserved beauty. The tools themselves were works of craftsmanship. An axe head needed careful forging, but the wooden handle required equal skill to shape. It had to fit the user's hand comfortably, had to be properly oriented relative to the head for good balance, and had to have just the right amount of flex to absorb shock without feeling whippy. Similarly, adze handles, drill handles, and the various mallets and wedges that supported woodworking all had to be properly made to be effective. Agricultural innovation. While raids and exploration capture historical imagination, the vast majority of Vikings were farmers, and agricultural technology formed the foundation of Norse society. The innovations and adaptations that allowed communities to thrive in Scandinavia's challenging climate are just as worthy of appreciation as ships or swords. The ARD, or scratch plow, was the basic tillage implement. Unlike later moldboard plows that turned the soil over completely, the RD simply scored a furrow in the ground. It consisted of a wooden beam with an iron share, the cutting point at the front. A horse or ox would pull the beam through the soil while the farmer guided it, creating trenches where seeds could be planted. Iron shares were precious, often one of a farm's most valuable possessions. The share had to be strong enough to penetrate rocky Scandinavian soil, sharp enough to cut roots and turf, and designed to shed soil rather than clogging. Blacksmiths who could forge good plowshares were highly valued. Plowing patterns reflected an understanding of soil management. Cross-plowing, running the yard in perpendicular passes, broke up the ground more effectively than single-direction plowing. This was time-consuming and required more animal power, so it was typically done on better land or in preparation for important crops. Sickles and scythes allowed for harvesting grain. Sickles were small, curved blades with short handles used one-handed to cut grain stalks that were gathered in the other hand. Scythes, with longer handles and blades, allowed a person to cut larger areas more quickly, though they required more skill to use effectively. Threshing, separating grain from stalks and chaff, was done by beating harvested grain with flails, or by trampling it under animal hooves. The grain would then be winnowed, tossed in the air on windy days so that wind would blow away the lighter chaff while heavier grain fell back down. These simple techniques, refined over millennia, were remarkably efficient. Grain mills, for grinding wheat, barley, or rye into flour, represented significant technological investments. Hand querns, two stone discs that ground grain between them, were common household tools. One stone sat stationary, while the other was rotated by hand, grain being fed through a hole in the center. Larger mills, either powered by water or by animals, could grind much larger quantities but required substantial construction and maintenance. Food preservation was crucial for surviving long northern winters. Drying, smoking, salting, and fermenting all played roles in keeping food edible for months. Fish were dried on racks. The cold, dry air, and sometimes smoke from fires below removing moisture that bacteria needed to grow. Meat was similarly treated, often packed in salt to draw out moisture. Cheesemaking transformed milk into a storable protein source. The basic process, adding rennet to cause milk to separate into curds and whey, then pressing and aging the curds, was well established. Different aging times and conditions created different cheese varieties. Butter was made by churning cream, agitating it until fat globules combined into solid butter and separated from liquid buttermilk. The butter could then be packed into barrels with salt, preserving it for months or even years. Some bog finds have preserved butter that Vikings buried for storage centuries ago, showing the effectiveness of their preservation methods. Haymaking was essential for keeping animals alive through winter. Grass would be cut with scythes in summer, spread to dry in the sun, then gathered and stored in barns or haystacks. The quality of hay, determined by when it was cut and how well it was dried, affected how much nutrition animals would get from it, and thus whether they'd survive to spring. Gardens provided vegetables to supplement grain and dairy diets. Cabbages, onions, peas, beans, and various root vegetables were cultivated. Vikings understood crop rotation at least informally, knowing that growing the same crop year after year exhausted soil while rotating crops maintained fertility. Animal husbandry involved selective breeding, though Vikings wouldn't have understood genetics in modern terms. By choosing which animals to breed based on desirable traits, size, temperament, milk, or wool production, they gradually improved their livestock over generations. This was what? Practical genetic engineering, guided by observation and experience rather than theory. Fences and enclosures managed livestock, keeping them from wandering or from eating growing crops. Stone walls, wooden fences, or even just thorny hedges served this purpose. Some fencing designs showed considerable ingenuity, like the use of bent and woven branches that created flexible but effective barriers. Buildings included not just dwellings but barns, storage sheds, workshops, and other specialized structures. Each had to be designed for its purpose. Barns needed to store hay while allowing air circulation to prevent mold. Smokehouses required controlled airflow to preserve meat properly. Storage buildings needed to protect grain from moisture and rodents. The agricultural calendar governed life. Different tasks required at different seasons. Spring meant plowing and planting. Summer involved tending crops, making hay, and maintaining fences and buildings. Autumn brought harvest, the busiest time when everyone worked to bring in crops before weather turned. Winter allowed for repairs, craft work, and planning for the next year. This seasonal rhythm connected directly to other Viking activities. Trading voyages and raids typically happened in summer, when men could be spared from farm work and when sailing was safest. This wasn't because Vikings were part-time warriors, but because their society's economic foundation required attention to agricultural rhythms. Trade and economics. Viking society operated on complex economic systems that required their own technologies for measuring, transporting, and valuing goods. The mechanisms of trade reveal practical mathematical understanding, metalworking skill, and social organization. Silver was the primary basis of Viking trade, but not in the form of standardized coins as we're used to today. Instead, hack silver, broken pieces of jewelry, coins, or silver bars, was weighed out to determine value. This required accurate scales and weights, technologies that Vikings developed to a high degree. Balance scales were the standard measuring tool. These consisted of a beam suspended at its center point, with pans hanging from each end. By placing an item to be weighed in one pan and known weights in the other, a trader could determine mass accurately. The beam would balance when the weights were equal, a visual confirmation of a fair transaction. The scales themselves required precision manufacturing. The beam had to be straight and uniform, with the fulcrum, the balance point, precisely at the center. The pans had to weigh the same. The suspension cords had to be equal length and attached at equal distances from the fulcrum. Small errors in any of these could make the scale dishonest, either intentionally for cheating or accidentally due to poor construction. Weights came in standardized denominations, often made from lead or bronze. Many Viking weights were decorated, showing they were valued possessions. Some weights were adjustable, with lead cores that could be added or removed to change the weight to match different standard systems, important for traders dealing with various cultures that had different weight measures. Scales small enough to fit in a purse allowed merchants to conduct business anywhere. Folding scales, where the beam could be hinged or disassembled for transport, were common finds in trading contexts. The weights would be carried in small pouches ready for use at a moment's notice. Silver's value was based on its weight and purity. Because hack silver came in many forms, from ornate jewelry to plain ingots, traders needed to assess purity. Touchstones, fine-grained dark stones, could be used to test silver. By rubbing the silver on the stone and comparing the mark it left to marks from samples of known purity, an experienced trader could estimate how much actual silver, as opposed to copper or other metals, an item contained. This system was flexible but required trust and skill. Disputes over weights or purity could be contentious, making honest traders valuable and their reputations important. Some traders developed specializations, becoming known for fair dealing in specific types of goods. Long-distance trade required transporting goods safely. Pack animals, primarily horses, could carry loads over land. Weight was a critical consideration. Only the most valuable goods justified the expense and risk of long overland journeys. Compact, high-value items like silver, spices, fine fabrics, or amber made sense for land trade. Ships transformed what could be traded profitably. Bulk goods, timber, iron, grain, wool could be transported by sea in quantities impossible over land. A nar could carry tons of cargo, making even relatively low-value goods economically viable if transported in sufficient volume. Navigation and seamanship thus directly enabled trade networks. The same shipbuilding and navigation technologies that allowed raids also facilitated commerce. Vikings established trading posts from Dublin to Constantinople, from Iceland to the Volga River, each connected by sea routes that made regular trade practical. Some trading centers became permanent towns. Places like Birka in Sweden, Hedeby in Denmark, and Kaupang in Norway served as nodes where traders from different regions would meet, exchanging goods and information. These trading towns required infrastructure, docks for ships, storage buildings, workshops for craftspeople who served traders, and residential areas. The organization of these trading centers reveals social complexity. Someone had to maintain order, resolve disputes, and protect traders from theft or violence. Some trading towns had walls or other fortifications. Others relied on distance and difficulty of access for protection. Different goods had different trade patterns. Luxury items like silk from Asia or glass from the Middle East traveled long distances through multiple transactions. Each trader would add their profit, so by the time an item reached Scandinavia, it might be worth many times its origin value. Still, wealthy Vikings would pay for these exotic goods because they signaled status. Slaves, tragically, were another trade good. Captives from raids could be sold, and this brutal commerce was economically important to Viking Age trade. Slave markets existed in many of the major trading centers, a grim reminder that Viking economic sophistication coexisted with practices we now recognize as deeply inhumane. Raw materials moved in opposite directions. Scandinavia exported timber, tar, furs, walrus ivory, and amber. Iron from Swedish mines was particularly valued. These resources were traded south and east for silver, spices, wine, and manufactured goods that couldn't be produced in the north. The economic system required no central authority or currency control. Value emerged from supply and demand, moderated by the practical constraints of transportation and the trust or lack thereof between trading partners. This decentralized system was remarkably robust, continuing to function across vast distances and cultural boundaries. Daily life technology. Beyond the dramatic technologies of ships and weapons, everyday life in Viking Age Scandinavia depended on countless smaller innovations and tools. These objects, often overlooked, reveal just as much about Viking ingenuity and practical problem-solving. Cooking technology centered on the fire. Open hearths, typically a stone-lined pit in the center of the longhouse, provided heat for cooking and warmth for the dwelling. Iron cauldrons, suspended from chains, allowed for boiling stews or porridge. These cauldrons were valuable items, often passed down through families. Soapstone, a soft stone that could be carved relatively easily and that withstood heat well, was fashioned into cooking vessels and lamps. A soapstone pot could be placed directly in the fire, and while it might crack eventually, it served well for years of daily use. Soapstone quarries were valuable resources, and carved vessels were trade goods. Wooden trenchers served as plates, carved from a single piece of wood with a shallow depression. Cups, bowls, and spoons similarly came from wood. These implements were inexpensive to replace but still represented skilled work, with many examples showing decorative carving or careful finishing. Lighting after dark relied on oil lamps or candles. Lamps were often small soapstone vessels with wicks made from twisted plant fibers or fungus soaked in oil or animal fat. Candles could be made from tallow, animal fat that solidified when cooled. Neither provided much light by modern standards, so most activities required daylight or took place near the fire's glow. Water management included wells and cisterns for storage. Some communities built sophisticated wooden well structures. Square shafts lined with timber that prevented collapse and kept the water clean, drawing water, required buckets, typically wooden, attached to ropes. The technology was simple but effective. Personal hygiene, despite stereotypes about unwashed medieval peoples, was important to Vikings. They used small iron tweezers for removing unwanted hair. Combs, often made from antler or bone, and sometimes quite ornate, served both practical and aesthetic purposes. Archaeological sites regularly produce fragments of these combs, suggesting they were common personal items. Soap was made from animal fat and wood ash. The alkaline components in the ash reacting with fats to create a simple detergent. While not as refined as modern soap, it served for cleaning both people and textiles. Some sources suggest Vikings even bleached their hair and beards using soap mixtures, showing that appearance mattered. Keys and locks protected valuables, even in a society where theft was considered deeply shameful. Locks were mechanical puzzles, iron mechanisms that required a specific key pattern to open. The keys themselves, often carried on belts or chains, were status symbols, advertising that the bearer had possessions worth protecting. Needles, both large and small, allowed for sewing garments and repairing textiles. Bone or antler needles served for heavy work like stitching leather or sewing thick wool. Finer needles made from bronze or even silver for wealthy individuals allowed for detailed embroidery or garment construction. Thread for sewing came from the same spinning process that produced weaving thread, though often finer. Linen thread was particularly valued for sewing because of its strength. But it had to be imported or produced from cultivated flax, making it more expensive than wool thread. Buttons didn't exist in the modern sense, but various fasteners secured clothing. Brooches, which were decorative pins, held cloaks or shawls. Some had complex mechanisms with springs and catches. Ties and laces, made from leather or woven cord, closed garments. Decorative clasps, sometimes quite elaborate, combined function with fashion. Shoes were made from leather sewn with leather thongs or sinew. Different styles served different purposes. Some boots reached mid-calf, providing protection and warmth. Lighter shoes sufficed for indoor or summer use. Wooden clogs or overshoes protected fine leather from mud and moisture. Belt pouches carried personal items. Without pockets in clothing, these pouches served as practical storage for eating utensils, fire-making tools, or small valuables. Many were decorated with embossed patterns or metal fittings. Jewelry served both decorative and economic functions. Arm rings, neck rings, and brooches were made from precious metals and could be broken up for payment if needed. They were portable wealth, easily carried and universally valued. Intricate twisted wire designs, filigree work, and cast patterns showed off the jeweler's skill and the owner's status. Gaming pieces and boards provided entertainment. Finds include elaborate gaming sets carved from walrus, ivory, or bone, some with pieces representing warriors or fantastic creatures. Games like Hanifataful, a strategic board game, required cunning and strategy, providing mental engagement during long winter evenings. Musical instruments included lyres, simple stringed instruments, and various pipes and whistles. Music was important for entertainment and storytelling, with skilled musicians holding respected positions in society. Children's toys included miniature weapons for boys learning warrior skills, small looms for girls learning textile work, and various carved animals or dolls for imaginative play. Even play objects taught practical skills needed for adult life. Cultural knowledge transfer. All of these technologies, from the sophisticated to the mundane, had to be passed from generation to generation. The Vikings had no printing press, no formal schools as we understand them. Knowledge transfer happened through demonstration, practice, and oral tradition, creating robust systems that preserved the technical knowledge across centuries. Apprenticeship was the primary method for teaching skilled crafts. A young person, often but not always a family member, would work alongside a master craftsperson for years. The apprentice would begin with simple tasks, watching and learning, gradually taking on more complex work as skills developed. This system had advantages. Learning was hands-on and practical. The apprentice saw not just how something was done, but why, understanding the reasons behind each technique. Questions could be answered immediately. Mistakes were caught and corrected before becoming ingrained bad habits. The master craftsperson benefited too. Apprentices provided labor, doing routine tasks that freed the master for more complex work. A successful apprentice might eventually take over the workshop, allowing the master to retire while ensuring their knowledge lived on. Different trades had different learning curves. Basic farming skills could be taught relatively quickly, though mastering the subtle judgments about weather, soil, and timing took years. Blacksmithing required substantial time to develop the hand-eye coordination and heat judgment necessary for consistent work. Shipbuilding, with its complex engineering and precision requirements, might require a decade or more of apprenticeship before a worker could be trusted to design and build independently. Storytelling served as another knowledge transfer mechanism. The sagas, long narrative poems or prose stories, preserved history, law, and cultural values. While entertainment was a primary function, stories also embedded practical information. Navigational landmarks might be described in stories of voyages. Legal precedents could be remembered through tales of disputes and their resolutions. Younger children learned by playing at adult tasks. Boys would carve toy boats or practice with wooden swords. Girls would spin thread or weave on child-sized looms. This playful practice built muscle memory and comfort with tools before the tasks became serious work. Community knowledge existed separately from specialized skills. Everyone needed to know basic cooking, fire tending, and household management. Seasonal tasks like harvest involved entire communities, with older members teaching younger ones the proper techniques. This shared knowledge bound communities together and ensured survival skills were broadly distributed. Innovation happened incrementally within this system. A craftsperson might experiment with a slight variation in technique. If it worked better, it would be adopted and taught to apprentices. Over generations, small improvements accumulated into significant advances. Geographic knowledge spread through travelers' tales. A merchant who had visited distant markets could describe what he'd seen, helping others plan their own journeys. Successful navigation routes would be shared, though sometimes kept partially secret to maintain competitive advantages. Writing existed but was limited. Runes, the angular alphabet carved into stone or wood, could preserve important messages or mark ownership. But writing was not used for technical manuals or detailed instructions. The knowledge remained embodied in people, not encoded in books. This oral and practical transmission of knowledge had weaknesses. If a particularly skilled craftsperson died without having fully trained successors, knowledge could be lost. If a community was destroyed by disease or war, its accumulated wisdom died with it. The fragility of this system meant that advances could be lost as well as gained. Religious practices intertwined with technical knowledge. Blacksmiths, as mentioned earlier, sometimes held quasi-religious status. The transformation of ore into metal seemed magical, and rituals surrounded the process. Whether these rituals had practical benefits or were purely spiritual is difficult to say. Perhaps a ritual that required the smith to work carefully and attentively served practical purposes even if its stated purpose was spiritual. Seasonal festivals marked the agricultural year and reinforced shared knowledge. Celebrations at planting or harvest times brought communities together, strengthening social bonds that supported knowledge sharing. The timing of these festivals also helped people track the calendar, important for knowing when to plant or when to prepare for winter. The Thing, the assembly where free men gathered to resolve disputes and make laws, served as another knowledge-sharing venue. Here, people from different areas would meet, trade news, and discuss issues affecting their communities. Technical innovations might be described and spread through these gatherings. Women's knowledge networks were distinct but equally important. Textile production, food preservation, herb lore, and childcare were primarily women's domains. Knowledge in these areas passed from mothers to daughters, from experienced women to younger ones, often with its own traditions and specialists. Legacy and conclusion. As we drift toward the end of our journey through Viking Age technology, it's worth reflecting on the remarkable legacy these innovations left behind. The Vikings weren't simply raiders or warriors, though they were certainly both. They were engineers who solved complex problems with limited materials, creating solutions that sometimes anticipated developments that wouldn't occur elsewhere for centuries. The clinker-built ships influenced European shipbuilding for generations. Even after the Viking Age ended, shipwrights continued using overlapping planks and flexible construction. Elements of Viking ship design can be seen in medieval cogs, in Renaissance exploration vessels, and even in some modern reconstructions that demonstrate the enduring wisdom of these ancient techniques. Pattern-welded blades and the understanding of how combining different metals created superior weapons influenced sword-making across Europe. While the specific techniques varied by region and period, the fundamental insight that composite materials could outperform homogeneous ones became a cornerstone of metallurgy. The sunstone's principles, though perhaps not widely understood in theoretical terms, demonstrated that careful observation and unconventional tools could solve seemingly impossible problems. Modern physics experiments with Iceland spar have proven that Viking navigators, whether they understood polarization or not, possessed an effective method for navigation that worked under conditions that would have grounded other seafarers. The social organization required to build ships, conduct long-distance trade, and settle the new lands created networks of contact that connected cultures across vast distances. The exchange wasn't only of goods but of ideas. Technologies observed in one place could be adapted and improved in another, accelerating innovation through cultural contact. Modern society still draws inspiration from Viking innovations. Bluetooth wireless technology took its name and symbol from a Viking Age Danish king, Harald Bluetooth, who united Danish tribes just as the technology unites devices. Numerous companies reference Viking heritage, whether explicitly or through values of strength, reliability, and daring that characterize how we remember the Norse seafarers. The experimental archaeology of recent decades has deepened our appreciation for Viking technology. Building and sailing replica ships, recreating forging techniques, and weaving on reconstructed looms have all demonstrated that what archaeological finds hint at, practical testing confirms. These ancient technologies worked, and worked well, solving problems with elegance and efficiency. What's perhaps most impressive is how Viking technology operated as an integrated system. Ship has needed sails, which required textile technology. Weapons needed smithing, which required ore extraction and fuel production. Navigation needed astronomical observation, which required accumulated knowledge. Each technology supported and enabled others, creating a web of capability that allowed Viking society to thrive despite challenging environments and limited resources. Tonight, we've sailed from the overlapping planks of longships to the crystalline geometry of sunstones. We've watched blacksmiths hammer irons into steel, feeling the heat of forges that glowed over a millennium ago. We've spun wool, planted crops, and measured silver on balance scales. Each technology revealed Vikings not as simple raiders, but as sophisticated problem solvers who created ingenious solutions from available materials. You are connected to this history more directly than you might imagine. The steel in your kitchen knife descends from techniques Vikings refined. The ships that cross our oceans still employ principles of hull design and construction that Viking shipwrights developed through trial and error. The very concept of experimenting, failing, learning, and trying again, that cycle of innovation that drives technology forward, is as old as the first craftsperson who thought there might be a better way to solve a problem. As you rest tonight, consider the hands that shaped these technologies. The anonymous shipwright who looked at overlapping planks and understood they should flex together. The smith who discovered that adding certain materials to their forge created harder metal. The navigator who learned to read subtle signs in sky and sea. The weaver whose steady rhythm at the loom produced fabric strong enough to catch the wind and carry adventurers to new worlds. These weren't mythical heroes or legendary figures, though some certainly became legendary. They were people who paid attention, who experimented, who passed their knowledge to the next generation, who built incrementally on what came before. That is the true legacy of Viking technology. Not any specific innovation, but the demonstration that human ingenuity, careful observation, and persistent effort can solve almost any problem. If you've found this gentle exploration of innovation and achievement helpful as you drift towards sleep, I'd appreciate if you'd like and subscribe to the Sleepy Science Society. It helps others discover these quiet stories of human ingenuity and achievement, one restful evening at a time. Sleep well now. Dream of dragon-prowed ships sailing beneath northern stars, of forges glowing red in the winter dark, of looms clicking in steady rhythm, and of all the countless clever solutions that humans have devised to meet the challenges before them. The world has always been shaped by those who looked at problems and thought there must be a better way, and that tradition continues tonight as your mind drifts gently into rest, carried by the current of curiosity and discovery. Good night, and may your dreams be filled with the quiet satisfaction of understanding how things work and why that matters.